long time since we've had visitors. Come on in closer. Shucks, don't be shy. Get on up here. Get on this front porch of mine. Have a sit down. And old Granny Bottoms will tell you a little story. You'd like that, wouldn't you? Sure you would. Now, did I ever tell you all that I had every fella in town after my hand when I first moved out here? Well, I sure did, didn't I? And they all had their hopes of holding all of me as well, too. Now, it took me a while, but I methodically weeded through each and every one of them. I felt that was only fair to consider each one of them, since I was the only woman in this here town for nearly 2 whole years, before any more women folk dared to settle down here. Anyway, after a while, I had narrowed down that marrying possibilities list of mine considerably. I told those fellas straight out one by one, when each finally did ask me for my hand, that they weren't going to be my one and only. And then there remained just that one fella who was left on my possibilities list. Well, that being the case, he just walked around smiling a lot after that. But then I figured out that his mind must have got the better of him. Men's minds will do that to them if they let them, especially when considering taking a lady's hand. He must have gone to wondering, you see, if he would be turned down flat too, like all those other fellas in town. So you know what he did? He decided he'd be the only one in that little town who didn't ask me to give him my hand, and all that was attached to it. That's what he did, or didn't rather. That way in his mind, he'd never have to know if I was going to eliminate him as well. And well, it got pretty darn frustrating for a while for him and me, I'll just have to tell you. Too, I think he got to where he thought he had me figured out, that I was just a sorry excuse for a woman, and a cold-hearted old prude and a spinster, and a frigid, stubborn female. But he was wrong, and I let him know it every time I get a chance. I did. Now, me being just about as prideful as him, I didn't tell him that he was wrong about me, you see. Nope, not on your life. I just tell him he was wrong about most everything else he did or said. And I think I might have put my own foot in my own mouth a few times doing that too. But I was just getting back at him for being the only fella in the town that didn't ask me to marry him, who should have been the very one who should have asked me to marry him. And so there we both were at a standstill, and sometimes at a standoff, circumstances depending. And I have considered that animals have it far easier since they don't have romantic issues to deal with. Yep, the good Lord made it so simple for those critters' lives, didn't he? Shame of it is, he tried to make it simple for people too, but we just seem to keep on making our own plans and keep on messing up his, don't we? Well, our unloved life went on for nearly 6 whole agonizing months, and after every other guy here had been turned down by me, and they weren't about to try again, not with the likes of me, the stubborn old prude that I'd turned into. But then one night, I was walking down this here street, and yep, this very street right here, and it holds such fond memories for me. Many fond memories, if I do say so myself. Anyhow, I overheard those fellas when they were gambling one night, shooting craps like they always do. And now the fellow that I loved, he didn't happen to be in on that crap shooting game that night, but I'd always walk by most every night anyway, just to see if I could get a look at him, you see, but I'd act like I was just taking my normal nightly stroll. And I just had to see him, though, even though I knew he was going to snub me once again the way I was going to snub him. But though I paid him no mind, at least I'd get a good look at him, and even if I was never going to get to touch him or kiss him or do nothing more with him. So there they all were, minus the one certain fella that night, and they were all gambling again. But I overheard one fella saying to the other fella there that he was just going to have to come calling on me. So I ran as fast as I could back to my place right here and right to this very porch, and I just waited. Well, I fell asleep just a-waiting, and that darn fella never did come around to call on me that night. I wondered then if they were just playing a vicious joke on me, or if I could have misunderstood them. Next morning, I didn't have long to stew on that question because there he came right up to my front door here. Come to think of it, this old porch holds some pretty fine memories as well. Now, I had given it much thought the night before, and I had mulled it over about 100 times. Did that guy lose the crapshoot game or did he win? And if he had won, was he going to ask me that all-important question? And was I going to accept him then? Just to make that other fella jealous who I really loved? But then, was I going to go around hating myself and that fella standing there on my front porch and that fella I really loved for the rest of my born days? And all because of my stubbornness and revenge and broken heart. Let me tell you, it was with great anticipation that I opened my front door that morning. And to set the scene, it just didn't feel right either. I mean, it wasn't nighttime, which is definitely the most romantic time of the day. It was all bright and sunny, and well, it just didn't feel right. But there he was, and not a bad-looking sort of fella either. I even thought for one instant that I can do this. It was like water rolling off a duck's back, but then I thought, that old duck wouldn't have to be washing his back like I'd have to. Well, did that fella ever fool me? And it was a great relief, let me tell you. He looked me straight in the eye. All those fellas had learned to do that from me, you know. And he asked me if he could speak with me. And so, true to my nature, I looked him straight in the eye. But then I looked a little on past him, and there they all were, standing around coaching him on like a bunch of cheerleaders in overalls. Oh, that does remind me of another story, but that'll have to wait for another day. Well, finally, with both of us standing there sweating it out, he choked out the words, and he said to me that I loved that one other fella, and it was his place to come and tell me that I'd better not let him get away. Well, I, of course, asked him how he knew, and how every other fella standing over there on this one street in town, how they knew. But that one fella didn't seem to know. And by the way, where was he getting away to? He said they just knew, that's all. Well, there had been this process of elimination, like I stated before. Then he said that one guy was up and just leaving town. Now that was serious. He would have been the first fella to skip town in all that time, since the very beginning, as a matter of fact. The only other ones who did leave only went down about 6 feet under. So I figured it had been pretty darn hard on him, as well as on me, us shunning each other's love like we had been doing. And so I asked that kind old fella on my front porch, what should I do? And he said that the dice were in my hands and it was up to me to roll them and see what I came up with. So I did. I marched right over to that sheriff's office and I locked myself in that sheriff's jail cell, and I took those keys, and around sunset I gave them to a raccoon friend of mine that I had befriended with much food, mostly raw eggs, and then I let that critter take off with those keys. Now, hours later, when the sheriff came back on inside, he found me just a-sitting in one of his jail cells. And of course, he asked me what I was up to. And I told him I had made a citizen's arrest for my disorderly conduct towards him. Well, he looked me over for a while, and then he said that I had never been drunk or disorderly in my life that he knew of. So then I had the opportunity to ask him if he thought I was a proper young lady, and he said he did. Then I asked him if he thought I should be set free then. Well, he didn't give me an answer for that for a long while. Because, I mean, it did have a double meaning, and I was meaning it to have a double meaning. And he was catching my drift. Well, he just sat down at his desk and propped up his booted feet up on that desk and put his hands up over his head. It caused his hat just to cock forward just a bit, and I did notice that he looked pretty darn impressive sitting there in that uniform with that badge on. And he just stared at me some more for a good long while. Then he commenced to start looking around for those keys. I quickly explained that that stupid old raccoon had followed me there and had took off with them. Well, that got him to laughing real good, and he came over to that jail cell and thrust his hand through those bars and shook my hand. I don't know why that called for a handshake. Men are such complex creatures. Just try to figure them out, but I guess that works both ways with us, doesn't it? Anyhow, he just kept holding on to my hand after he'd finished shaking it. Then he grinned real big, and he said he kind of liked having me locked up where he could keep his eye on me. Well, I did choose to take that remark as a compliment, I want you to know. Anyhow, he said he didn't know how he was going to get me out of there, short of sawing into those bars. So I just told him that it was all right. I sort of wanted to stay in there anyway. Finally, after a few more words that transpired between us, which I'm not going to tell you, he finally, quick as a wink, jumped right up and went racing off to another town, and he fetched himself a preacher, and we got married standing on both sides of that jail cell. I figured he was either so excited that he wasn't thinking straight, or he was just thinking real straight indeed and wasn't going to let me get away from him like he'd been thinking about getting away from me earlier. Well, that sheriff's office sure was crowded that night, with all those fellas in there, and it smelled pretty darn awful, too. But none of us minded at all. And I must say, I was right proud of that preacher man. He didn't ask any questions. He just married us like nothing was wrong. Maybe he thought I was headed off to the state pen or something, I don't know. Anyhow, I then requested a few raw eggs for the reception. And I sat them on that jail cell window and gave that old raccoon a whistle. That jail cell window, it holds a grand memory for me to this day, too, I might add. Well, it was night time by that time, and that raccoon, true to his nature, came rushing back for those eggs, and sure enough, just as I hoped, it was still playing around with those keys, and well, you'll just have to use your imagination for the rest of that story. So if nothing else happens today, it's really been a nice one, getting to reminisce about one of my all-time favorite stories. Be seeing y'all. Bye now.